Welcome, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today. I know it was kind of a quick turnaround after everyone returned into the office from holidays. I know all of us from the community of practice were pretty surprised how quickly this session came up, but we're so excited to have you here for what is our very last scheduled session on how artificial intelligence can support your economic development work. And today's topic specifically is how you can use AI to connect with stakeholders and potential partners. Whether you're working with community partners, industry collaborators, or research participants, engagement and connection is really at the heart of everything we do in economic development. And it's also getting more complex and more demanding. Funders and partners have a lot of competing interests and demands on their time and resources. So we're really looking for ways to help you all, particularly in this last year of your BBBRC funding, to make those connections as impactful as possible. So we're very pleased to be joined by two of our colleagues at RTI, Jacob Smith and Mike Hogan, who have been spearheading this session, this series all along since the summer. And we've had 7 of these sessions. So huge thanks to Jacob and Mike for leading us through. But together, Jacob and Mike will walk us through practical examples and approaches you can use to start thinking about how you can integrate these real world ways that AI can help you identify audiences, personalize your outreach, and streamline your communication. So with that, I will go ahead and turn the session over to Mike to get us started.
Thank you so much, Marissa. For the first 10 minutes or so, I'm going to give a short overview of where we have been and what we've been working on since July of last year. So this is the 6th and final session in our series. And I wanted to open up by giving us a little recap of where we've been over the last 6 months. So this isn't going to be a one-by-one summary of each of the sessions, but just sharing a few of the key themes and takeaways from 5 of the previous sessions to recap where we started and what we've covered. All the sessions are recorded and available on our YouTube page, and also the resources and presentations are on the website. But in July, we started with the background on Gen AI, some of the background and the potential uses, practical considerations. We looked at data analysis in August, specifically with accessing data and prompting questions. We moved in October into strategic planning, how to prompt and how to create strategic plans, but also emphasizing the need for community and partner engagement, which is the theme that we're going to be talking about today. In November, talked about grants and resource development, how to use Gen AI to search and identify grants and resources. And then in December, covered storytelling and communications with an overview of federal guidelines for grant reporting, which is very critical for storytelling for this audience, and broader communication around distinct audiences. So the first 3 sessions, we looked at these research and analysis uses for AI across a range of tasks, ranging from that initial analysis to translating that into a strategic plan. And we see AI as a tool that can really accelerate and deepen the economic developers' research and analysis process. From that initial analysis, finding those trends and those data sets, to synthesizing those insights and starting to connect some of those disparate data sources, helping us to examine and understand some future scenarios and compare different strategies, anticipate some challenges and opportunities, and then to turn some of that insight into content for action-ready plans. And throughout each of these steps, we looked at some example tasks, prompts, and outputs, and to understand some of their strengths, some of their drawbacks, and recognize where Gen AI can be really useful, and also where some additional input is needed. So our initial research exercises gave us good insights into what worked, and what didn't work very well. So initially, it was really useful for compiling and summarizing things, especially in new and emerging fields where often you're relying on several different data sources that aren't necessarily together. They're good for getting background on a topic, especially if you're looking at a new field. You need to get a cursory understanding. It's very helpful. It's been very helpful to find public sources and references, and particularly helpful are some of these deep research and pro tools that allow us to look deeper at some of the sources and references where this research is coming from. And talking about how specific prompting has made our answers better. So oftentimes when working with some of these different AIs like ChatGPT, it's going to kind of bring you into this conversation, but rather often doing specific prompts and specific requests helps to be more specific. At the same time, we found a few challenges. We're looking at unverified sources, some of these public press releases, websites, and non-paywalled news sources. Some of them were outdated or unverified information, as well as some of the well-documented cases of AI hallucination or citation of non-existent sources. Some of the writing quality is mixed and the output was a little generic. And sometimes Gen AI tools didn't follow the instructions. And at times you can see the tools kind of shifting and going and mischaracterizing or answering a prompted question in a roundabout or confusing way. But something that was interesting is we've been looking at this over 6 months, and what works today might not be the same 6 months from now. We've seen an incredible evolution in what has been effective over the last 6 months, over the last 12 months. And it's kind of crazy to think that 6 months from now, we might be looking at something even more complex and a different set of scenarios. So we also emphasize that relevant context is very critical. As we move from those initial exercises and initial searches, we realize that more specific research can benefit from providing the right data to the AI model so they can generate outputs that are higher quality and more relevant. This included specific inputs, things like regional economic data, strategic plans, prior reports, policy documents, sometimes things from external regions. But overall, if you're looking at this task and you need to be accurate, accuracy and precision are required, it might not be the best to rely on the AI model to already know what you're trying to find. You may need to provide it yourself. In doing so, it's very critical to maintain data privacy, not uploading any specific sensitive or proprietary information. But in doing so, you can get more tailored insights, more useful strategic plans, and more well-informed regional specific recommendations. For funding, search, and prioritization, we found that AI can really augment some of the processes of gathering, ranking, and developing approaches to pursue opportunities. So just to identify and get that relevant context, a lot of these manual search tools can really help us to just understand what's out there in the universe. But then some of these deeper research tools that have reasoning and thinking models can help to deeper search for those funding sources, to help prioritize those funding sources, and to help to develop strategies for pursuing those prioritized funding sources. In addition to this, and this is another thing that has evolved over the last 6 months, we found that there's not a uniform national or federal guidance around AI use for grantees, and there is still a lot of ambiguity out there. We provide 4 different agency guidances as examples here, starting with the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, which provides a conceptual foundation and a standard. And it's useful to understand some of the underlying fundamentals and the underlying concepts. For people who've worked with NIST before, NIST is an organization that sets out standards and structures, but does not necessarily give specific guidance or recommendations. We then get into 2 agencies that do have specific guidance and recommendations, those being NSF and NIH. And it's interesting because the 2 of them have taken very different approaches to AI use. For grantees and grant reporting, NSF does not strictly prohibit AI. but it does set out to protect privacy and emphasizes transparency. And NSF is looking at AI as a tool that can be used, but it is also continuing to revise and update its guidance. On the other hand, the NIH expressly states and is strictly prohibiting submissions or grants that are substantially developed by AI. So NIH limits both the use of AI and the number of annual submissions by a single PI, driven by the concern of a sort of flood of AI-generated proposals and reports. We bring these two up because EDA, up to this point, does not yet have a clear policy or clear guidelines on the use of AI in writing, in submissions, or in reporting. We expect that the landscape of executive orders, agency guidance, federal, state, and international laws around AI use are going to evolve quickly. And there's a lot of ambiguity right now. And so for those who are working in this process of EDA, grant reporting and writing, the best kind of piece of advice and the best recommendation is to continue to stay abreast of what is going on in the AI policy world. So for grantees, with that in mind, we looked at a few practical recommendations and a few considerations. As you're in the processes of reporting, of communications, of grant writing, et cetera, some of those recommendations include maintaining authorship of whatever work that is written by you and has your name on it will remain your responsibility. So if it's written by AI and there are errors in it, that is one of those things that may come back to the individual author or organization. So the recommendation is using AI conservatively for specific uses, to set clear institutional policies and processes, training staff on them and being transparent about their use, monitoring those changes in policy and guidelines, and then maintaining that data privacy. Do not upload sensitive or private information into a tool like a ChatGPT. And then finally, a few future considerations. This is going to continue to evolve. The policy landscape is going to continue to evolve. The cultural and economic landscape is going to continue to evolve as use becomes more common. The technology may be changing so quickly that it may outpace the personnel capacity to absorb and understand its uses. Guidelines are going to continue to change, coming from different government agencies, executive, congressional, international, state, and private sector funders and partners who are also starting to put out guidelines around AI usage. And then there's going to be a greater level of demand on staff as organizations look to optimize productivity. So as we move forward, this landscape is going to continue to change and continue to evolve, and it has evolved over the last 6 months as we've worked on it. So to close out this section, I'm reminded of something that we heard over and over again from many of the participants, grantees, and the COP members, that economic development often hinges on a lot more than just data. Investors, partners, and residents all need to believe in a vision. So AI can help us to weave data into the story, understand those impacts, understand investment, understand partnerships, et cetera. And AI can help build that compelling story arc. But in the end, AI alone is not going to create the partnerships, the collective vision, and the buy-in that's needed for a successful economic development effort. It can contribute to the process by augmenting capacity, helping those leaders focus on their core roles and telling their story. But in the end, economic development comes down to getting buy-in from members of the community and building those coalitions to do the work. And so want to leave that as a final piece of context and a final kind of thought about the summary of what we've learned over the last 6 months through this webinar series, is just the importance of using AI as a tool, but recognizing that AI alone is not going to be the single thing that is able to, move economic development forward. I want to leave you with that piece of context as we transition over to Jacob, as we move into some of the examples and exercises. Jacob, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. I am pulling up my screen now. So I think the point of today's session, the second piece of the session, is to really kind of take everything that we've learned over the previous sessions, all of the fundamentals, all of the discussions about prompt engineering, and show how you can actually use that to do something like stakeholder and partner research, how you can really take a really largely human-centric relationship building process and amplify your capability to build those relationships leveraging AI. I think some of the points that Mike made earlier and that we've continued to discuss through every session have been the importance of understanding really the limitations of AI. And I think as you all continue to use these tools and as they become more prevalent in society across all of the different jobs that people are performing, that's going to be something to keep a really close eye on. I think we've seen since July probably 4 or 5 model iterations. I think when we started this, we were using ChatGPT 4.0, and we're already at 5.2 at this point. Same goes for all the other model providers out there. So the tools have become more complex. They've become better in some ways. In some ways, maybe they've become more difficult to use, and we're seeing expanded functionality. So today, we're going to talk about really one tool in particular, Notebook LM, and really reframe the way to think about using AI as something that can augment human-centric workflows. So we've had previous discussions throughout the course of this series on how to use AI for research or data analysis or to draft content. Today, we're really going to focus on the stakeholder piece and want to highlight, similar to what we've talked about in the previous sessions, that AI can be great for doing things kind of that broad general research all the way down to developing highly specific strategies. So today, we're going to focus the conversation around doing some general research. We're going to talk a lot about deep research on organizations as well as individual stakeholders. And then we'll talk about how you can tie up all of that information into a strategy just through prompting and using AI tools. Like Mike said, you're the ultimate author. These tools are there to help you do what you ultimately need to do. They're not the end all be all, but they can be extremely helpful. And I hope we can get that point across today. So one of the things throughout the sessions that we've discussed is the importance of prompt engineering. And we've talked about the prompt canvas that we've shared previously, sets out kind of a framework for how you use a model to get the best response. I want to highlight today that you can also get a lot out of these models just through conversational prompting, doing general exploration. So maybe you're starting with a little bit of context about your region or some funders that you think might potentially be interesting. In the case for general research, it takes very little time to go into your tool of choice, whether it's a ChatGPT, a Claude, a Gemini, and just ask questions. There are some examples here on the left of, what type of philanthropic organizations fund specific different types of economic development. Which of these foundations tend to fund system level or field building work? How do these foundations that don't really explicitly fund some of the things that are top of mind to economic developers actually engage and can provide funding for those types of efforts? What signals are there that these organizations can actually fund long-term efforts as opposed to, short-term one-off grants? All of that information, you can have a single chat with one of these more advanced tools and get a lot of good background knowledge very quickly. throughout these sessions, we've also talked about how to improve these outputs that you can get. So you can go from a basic conversational method to a method where you're actually doing highly specific prompts. I think some of the key things that you want to think about as you're using it for this general research process is there are really advanced thinking and reasoning models that you can select whenever you're within a tool. And to get the best out of them, you should be making sure that you're selecting kind of the most advanced option that you have access to. Mike talked about the deep research modes that we've discussed in previous sessions that essentially allow the tools to go from looking at maybe 5, 6 sources to looking at, in cases with Gemini, I've seen it analyze over 200 sources at a time to build out a full report. We've talked about the importance of context. If you have information that you think is relevant to the particular ask that you have from the tool, make sure you're sharing that. Thinking about, in that same vein, providing similar organizations in this particular case. If you want to find an organization that's similar, maybe they don't have a funding opportunity available, but maybe there are others that might. And these models really have been trained on the entirety of the internet. So the more that you constrain the scope, the deeper the output that you will get on a particular thing that you're interested in. Most of the models at this point have gotten really good at actually citing the sources that they're using in line with the responses, or at least at the end of the response, you can see what it was using to generate that. That's an important piece to make sure that you can maintain trust in these models. And we already talked about this prompting source that's at the end. So just to think about general research and reframing AI as AI will do everything, I wanted to put it in perspective of how I might approach a task where I'm looking for maybe non-traditional funders or organizations that I'm not familiar with. So in this case, using a kind of manual and AI augmented research method, wanted to lay out, there's a lot of value in the knowledge that you already have, the databases that you already have access to, things that an AI model has not necessarily been trained on or that does not have access to specifically. So for instance, in this case, I highlight the IRS has a tax-exempt organization database. You can filter it by a variety of different filters that they have available, and you can get down to kind of a short list of organizations that may or may not be interesting. You can then take those organizations, plug them into your AI tool of choice, and just conversationally prompt and say, hey, I want to compare and contrast these organizations, get a high-level idea of what are their similarities, what are their differences, are they actually relevant as part of this partnership funnel? You can then even say, well, maybe my filters weren't quite right within my database search. What does AI think about similar organizations to the ones that I've already plugged in? Get a kind of expanded scope, maybe a more relevant list of organizations that are beyond what you had initially pulled. Then you might take it a level deeper. For those organizations that really become high on your interest list, you can actually go to that same IRS website, couple clicks, you'll be able to pull the Form 990s for those organizations of interest. And instead of reading through, the joyous long tax documents that are there, you can actually use AI to help query those to get the information that's specifically of interest to you and learn more about what these organizations are funding, what the amounts of that funding might be, when that funding occurred, who are the other stakeholders that are involved that are receiving that funding. So that's kind of the high-level general research process. What I wanted to spend more time on today was actually the deeper research. So say you have that short list of organizations that you've identified through your external research process. What you can then do is use a deep research functionality within a tool in order to get kind of a full report, a report that will go search the web for, in some cases, hundreds of resources to give you truly a fuller picture of what these organizations are all about, what they're funding, how you might partner with them. So I've shown here some examples of what the deep research looks like and how you access it within each tools. Usually there's a little drop-down menu near where you enter your prompt that gives you access to a deep research functionality. So in the case of organization deep research, I want to highlight Notebook LM specifically. So for the rest of today, we're going to basically live within Notebook LM as I demo some of the functionalities here. I think we've talked about it in a couple of the other sessions, but Notebook LM is a Google product. There's a free version and there's a paid version. The free version is actually really powerful. The paid version just gives you access to a little bit more capability to upload more documents. That's really about it. So within Notebook LM, you have capability to upload sources that you have found yourself that you know are very relevant and you can have trust in. And if you only upload those sources, you can use a large language model just to query the information that lives within that notebook. In addition to that, you can also use the studio functionality, which is on the right side of this interface, to do a lot of really cool things with all this data that maybe you've been asking questions about already in the chat interface, or to kind of develop a mini deliverable associated with the data. You can imagine having to read through 24 990 forms may not be a super fun task when you're looking for a very specific piece of information. Well, with this tool, you can actually just query the collective information there in order to get an idea of what the answer is to the question you're asking. So you can upload your own documents. In addition to that, you can also use deep research functionality within a notebook in order to pull in more relevant resources associated with a particular, in this case, organization that you're interested in. So the demo that we'll look at today is the CERDNA Foundation. Really, I'll pull over the window now for what the Notebook LM looks like live so you all can see it. So in here is our sources. We've got PDFs. These are all the 990 forms. In order to do additional deep research on the CERDNA Foundation outside of just these 990 PF forms, you can click the deep research button here or select deep research here. And then it's the same as prompting any other LLM. So we have a document that we're going to share with you all today that has these example prompts in the document itself. So before this session, I took this prompt to do some deep research on CERDNA, and you can see it's a pretty robust prompt. I actually used AI to help me create this. I asked AI, I need to create a prompt that will tell me everything an economic developer might want to know if they're trying to receive funding from this philanthropic organization. And it came up with these 7 points here. So all I did was copy and paste this into the deep research prompt window here. And I'll show you the output that came back from that. So it gives you a summary of the document, and then it starts with this entire report that has the sources cited within it. All of those sources that were found as part of this deep research report generation are actually all now pulled into the notebook as well. They are automatic. You click a button to import them after you generate this report. But you can see all the 7 things that we had in that prompt are included in this full report, this deep research report related to this particular foundation. So it's a relatively long document because it is really a full deep research report. It includes information about CERDNA, what they're funding, all of those questions we asked. It includes the key stakeholders that you might want to engage with. It even gives, because of the way the prompt was written, some ideas about what engagement might look like with this particular organization. give some watch outs, some things maybe not to do if you're trying to engage with this organization. And again, all of the sources that this was pulled from are included as part of the report. So that's pretty cool. You can get a deep research report. It'll maybe take, less than 10 minutes for that to run. So what you can also do within Notebook LM that's a little unique from other tools is you can select the sources that you want to query within a given notebook. So it's not doing web searching unless you ask specifically for that deep research report. It's only looking at the information that's here. So this deep research report that I just showed you, you can select that and just have a chat with that document specifically. In addition to that, you can use the studio functionality specific to a given source or all of the sources to generate all of the things you see here. So an audio overview, video overview, a mind map, a report, flashcards, so on and so forth. So what I did is I selected that deep research report and I asked it to create me a slide deck. So this is the slide deck that I created without any additional prompting within Notebook LM as it relates to the CERDNA Foundation. And you can see, let's see, it is 15 slides long, and it basically summarizes that deep research report in slide form. So it's something that you can easily digest. It's kind of at the executive level with enough detail that if you want to go back and explore something within that report itself, you can. So it's a quick way to get a good, solid overview, pretty deep overview of an organization that you may be interested in. So conclude some of the stakeholders that we talked about and that action plan and the additional context about what the organization is truly looking for. So this is all within Notebook LM, pulling in some external information, those Form 990s in that deep research report, and then actually generating an artifact based on, each button here is just a prompt that they've pre-engineered to actually generate this material. So to give an example of what the chat interface looks like, I just asked, with all the sources selected, what regional initiatives have been funded since 2022. And it gives you that list here within the chat functionality. It also gives you the specific citation to the source that information was pulled from in line. So you get a good idea of the answer to that particular question in this case. And, some of these organizations, I think in this case, this organization is not really specifically focused on funding some of these advanced manufacturing, robotics, or AI related efforts. But you can ask, have they been directly or indirectly involved with that? And it will search through, in this case, I think there's almost 90 sources in this list that have been pulled in from the deep research reports to give you an overview of who they have funded that is doing something related to that. That can give you some idea of what that strategy might look like. So that is organization deep research. The prompt example, you can feel free to modify that as much as you need in order to customize the outputs to whatever it is that you're interested in about these organizations. But just as a basic blueprint of how complex you can get with a prompt in order to get, a lot of good information about a particular funding organization. So we saw within that funding organization deep research, we had prompted to ask for specific individuals or stakeholders at that organization that we might want to learn a little bit more about before we actually engage with that company. So within that document, yes.
I'm wondering if it might be just to pause in case anybody has questions about the organizational aspect. I see there's some folks giving some thumbs up in the chat, or if they've used Notebook LM, or I think might be a new tool for some folks who may just be more familiar with ChatGPT and that type of thing. So just want to pause.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I say going once, going twice. Feel free to put questions in the chat too.
Yes, I am watching the chat as we go. Okay. Well, basically, for stakeholder deep research, we'll do a very similar thing, and we're going to keep it within the same notebook. So within that worksheet that was shared, there's another example prompt shared in the prompt canvas framework style that gives you all of the things you might want to know about an individual within an organization that you might want to know if you're trying to reach out to that individual to get some relationship building going and maybe ultimately some funding. So this prompt is specifically set up so that you can use a LinkedIn profile within the context and input. So you just paste the URL in there and you can take this. And within Notebook LM, you can do the same exact thing. So you can just select your deep research. You can paste that prompt in here with that LinkedIn URL included within the prompt, and you can generate a deep research report on the individual. So for this particular case, I looked at the president of the organization that we're talking about today, and you can see it followed the prompt pretty well to generate this report. You get kind of an executive level summary, some of the information about the organization itself, as well as his involvement with the organization. There's actually a practitioner cheats sheet that's included within this that gives you information about what to emphasize, what to avoid, maybe some objections or concerns that might be brought up that you can be prepared to address. And then there's a really deep dive on the person's history, all the things that they've been involved with before that might influence the way they think about, whatever it happens to be that they're funding, and information about what level of decision making the individual has, so on and so forth. It's a long, deep research report based on LinkedIn plus some additional deep research across the web as it relates to this particular individual. And just to give a demonstration of, what that might look like if you turned it into an actual slide deck. This is what the slide deck that came out was. This is an 8-slide deck that tells you who this individual is, what the worldview is, all this information, some additional information about the Certain Foundation, so on and so forth. I think some of these, engagement kind of pieces of wisdom are kind of useful when it comes to actually crafting an outreach strategy to these individuals. So you can see, you can very quickly go from an in-depth report that's probably 10 to 15 pages long, that's very cited with a lot of different resources, to a quick slide deck that gives you an overview of this particular individual. So we did it for one person. Maybe you're not just thinking about engaging one person. Maybe you want to do this for multiple people. So I see we have a question.
Question in the chat.
Yeah, have I tried it on myself to see how accurate it is? And I have not, but I will do that after this session because I think that's actually a really cool experiment. And it brings up a great point of there is, I'm walking through kind of what's the latest and greatest capabilities of these tools, but there's still the capability, even with sourcing all of this information, that it could be hallucinating. It could be pulling things from sources that are not as accurate. What I want to emphasize is that this is not, like we noted before, it shouldn't be the end all be all. You should, if you're actually going to, reach out to an organization, you should verify this information. You should, the important pieces that you pull out from this deep research, should look at those sources and make sure that they are, in fact, accurate. And I think the cool thing about a tool like Notebook LM is you can compare maybe a web research to a source that you're pulling specifically. So you have IRS data. Maybe you have other types of data within your region that you can pull in to help verify some of the information that's coming directly from web resources. So that's the stakeholder deep research. Really, the secret is the prompt crafting, and this is just an example of a prompt. You can change this to ensure that everything you would potentially want to know is actually searched for as it relates to a given individual. And you don't have to do this prompt, use this prompt within Notebook LM. If you have another LLM of choice, you can do the same thing in ChatGPT. You can do it in Claude. You can do it with just regular Gemini and receive a similar output if you're using that deep research functionality. Any other questions on the stakeholder deep research? And if not, then we will proceed to communication strategy. And within this vein, it's a very similar process. And I think it's one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight, Notebook LM as a unique, useful tool. You can do all of this within the tool. Then all of the information that you find lives within that notebook. You could maybe imagine having a notebook for each different organization that you're potentially interested in pursuing funding from, and have you can share that with your teams, with other individuals that are helping work on this. So the prompt that you see here, the text is probably too small to read, but it's also included in the document that was shared. This prompt is customized specifically to the use case today, so you'll have to modify it in order to customize it to whatever you happen to be doing research on in the future. But this prompt, in this case, within Notebook LM, I actually took that prompt and I didn't put it in the chat. The chat is really not like a ChatGPT or a Gemini or a Claude. It is more of a short form conversational space within Notebook LM to ask short pointed questions about the data that exists. What I actually did was went to the reports and I did a create my own report, and I pasted that prompt here in order to generate an output from the studio section that I will show you here. So the prompt itself asks for this executive strategy summary, which you can see here. In addition to that, it talks about the arc. The prompt mentions a specific time frame, so you can modify that to make sure that it fits within your particular needs, and the strategy may be different. You can also augment it with things that have worked in the past as it relates to relationship building. But basically, this report is taking all of the resources that are in this notebook. I had all resources selected when I generated this report, and giving you some idea of how you might start to engage with this particular foundation, and particularly the president of the foundation in this case. It goes all the way through to actually giving some sample framing for how you might reach out to this individual in an introductory message, gives you a first meeting agenda that you might put forth if you do end up engaging with the individual. So at a high level, this report was a very basic example of how you can develop a communication strategy based on a body of research that you've both curated and used AI to help you develop, and give you a outcome that gives you step-by-step instructions, do's and don'ts, preliminary language that you might use as you do engage this individual. And I didn't do this for this particular case, but you could even take that report that you generated, re-upload it as a source, and turn it into, you could turn it into a slide deck if you want to hand it off to someone else and say, here's the communication strategy with this organization. Or maybe you want to turn it into an infographic. Or you could listen to it as a podcast on your way to or from wherever you happen to be heading at any moment in time. So I want to pause there. That is what I wanted to cover today. And I wanted to leave some time for discussion and Q&A because we were so heavy demo focused here. So I'll stop sharing.
There's a question in the chat about incorporating information about your own organization into a tool like this.
That's a great question. And I have not done any fine tuning or training about my own organization as it relates to this particular tool. But I could envision a case where you actually take non-confidential information about your organization and upload it as a source, and then in your prompt specify that you actually want the tool to use information that exists within the notebook about your organization to customize the outputs from the other sections. And within the studio section, you'll see there's a little pencil icon in the top right of many of those boxes, and you can put in specific custom instructions within each button on the studio side to further customize what the output might look like or what you want the model to ultimately give you at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Michael, thanks for dropping your feedback in the chat. I was asking that because I'm wondering if you would want the foundation that you're researching, like the Cerna Foundation, the data or info to apply to your organization, and even like seeing if it would, be a good fit. But it seems like this tool is like just an objective analysis of the organization you're researching, regardless of how good of a fit it is or isn't. Maybe we're deciding that after the point.
Yeah, and we've gone through so many layers of AI in Notebook LM. What you could do in that case, and what we've done in previous sessions, is incorporate the context of your own organization into those deep research prompts. So if you want the deep research report about Cerdna in this case to be specific to your org, you can make sure that you specify that in that organization deep research prompt. You can give it the context of who you are, your region, some of the things that you're interested in, and then it can help to customize and contextualize the actual output of that deep research report to your particular circumstances. So it is, if you just use your own sources to upload, it is really a way to objectively interrogate a body of information. But the work around there is to incorporate that additional context and kind of ground truth about who you are into the deep research prompt. And even if you just want to direct the prompt to a particular resource about your organization, that may get you a little bit closer to what you're looking for.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm curious, do we have any Notebook LM users here?
We're a little bit opposite in that our organization has not figured out how to most effectively use AI at the broad organizational level and keep our intellectual property safe. So it's actually not allowed on our computers.
Interesting. So in that case, how are you all using AI for any tasks outside of things that involve proprietary information, or is it more of a complete ban, like an IP ban on those web addresses?
Right now, we have a complete ban, so I use my personal computer if I need to do anything. You didn't hear that here. No, that's not true. I use it for personal is what I mean. I don't use it for work stuff.
Yeah. And I think we've seen, working with organizations and in our own organization, there's been, everyone has been pretty risk averse as it comes to AI, because there is that potential for information to get out that you don't that shouldn't be out, really. So I think the policies that we have in place and that we've seen others have in place are very clear about like what you can put into a tool, what you should not put into a tool, and in cases where there is sensitive information, we've seen folks pivot to more the enterprise subscriptions to the tools, where the data is not used to train a model. A company may not have access to it. I think the classic example is Microsoft Copilot, where everything that comes into and out of the model as you're having a discussion with it is encrypted, and the only person that has access to the de-encrypted data is the actual user of the tool. But it's still a big challenge, I think, for a lot of organizations who work with sensitive data, particularly.
It just takes time and resources to develop that policy and all of that. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions, whether related to this topic or others?
Do you have other examples of AI tools that do a good job of keeping data sensitive? For instance, I work with a lot of tribal governments in California, and we have to be very careful about data that we're sharing. And I wouldn't want any data leaks to jeopardize like sensitive data of different tribal governments.
So in terms of widely accessible tools, it really varies from each of the individual providers, but typically the way that organizations are handling that, in my experience, is to go for the full enterprise subscription, where you actually have to meet with someone from the sales team at OpenAI or Anthropic or Google in order to discuss what your concerns are and make sure that their security aligns with the level of sensitivity that you have as it relates to your data. So as an example of not going that route, I would say Claude has long been the single tool provider that does not train on your data. And in order to actually make that happen within Chat GPT, you have to like go into your settings and turn off like don't use my data to train. But at the same time, they still have access to your data. It's not encrypted. So if something does happen, they potentially could see it, or, in worst case scenario, it could leak. So yeah, the real, other than going to a company that has an enterprise subscription model or hosting your own on a secure server, there's not a great workaround for that at this point.
No, that makes sense. I appreciate what you said about encrypted data, because I know we've all gotten those emails from like Home Depot or whomever when our credit card info gets leaked. And like for sensitive client data, I mean, if it can happen with our credit cards, I'm sure it could happen with like OpenAI or ChatGPT. So I think the encrypted data is really important moving forward. So I'm going to look into that more.
If during my closeout, if there are any other questions, please drop them in the chat. We are all monitoring, or feel free, raise your hand, interrupt me. I do not have a preference, but I just wanted to take a moment and thank Jacob and Michael so much for, again, this series. We've had excellent participation and engagement. I think we're all kind of trying to determine how to use AI and understand how it can be integrated into our workflows, both safely and efficiently. So with that, I will tease Jacob and Mike will be writing a blog post kind of summarizing everything that we've covered in these past 6 or 7 sessions. I can't remember exactly. So keep an eye out for that. It will be on our resource page on the Building Better Region COP website. And we'll be sure to send out that via email to all of the folks that registered for this series. So with that, if there are no other questions, I think we can just go ahead and thank Jacob and Mike one last time. And on behalf of Jess and I and the COP, we will see you at our next events. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.